Hello, party people. Welcome. Uh, just going to give everyone a little second or so to jump on in. Just while I'm doing that, if someone could please just jump into the slides and audio and let me know if that's coming through okay, that would be awesome. I can see a bunch of people on there. Thank you, team. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mandy. A lot of thumbs up there. Thank you, guys. Nice work. Also, guys, just a little bit of housekeeping as we get into today. So happy for you to throw any banter into the chat as we're going through. If you've got questions though, and you want to get your questions answered, then if you could please pop those into the Q&A box. I'm going to stop for questions. I'm happy to get a bit off track with the content today. So I'll jump in on a few questions as we're going through. And I'll also have some time for questions at the end. And look, as always, guys, I can guarantee you that if you've got a question, if you're thinking about this stuff, then someone else does as well. So be a mate, pop it into the Q&A and we'll all learn together. So look, guys, I think first thing here is to say nice one on jumping online today. I know this time of year, it's scary to think that, we're only a couple of months away from the silly season and, a lot of people are sort of taking their foot off the pedal. I think, money is one of these things that it doesn't just happen on its own. And so, you guys are already part of the 1% for taking the time showing up today to get on the front foot. I'm pumped to get into this one because, I've got kids myself. We speak to a lot of people either with kids or thinking about having kids. And we can all see the challenges out there today when it comes to investing and money. Property affordability is at all-time lows. We're lucky to live in a really great country in Australia, but living well in Australia does not come cheap, and it doesn't seem to be getting any easier. So if you want to help, your family and future generations get a bit of a leg up, this is one way that you can do that. So I'm pumped to get into it. I am going to start today I'll start with some of the basics and then we'll get into some of the practicalities, what accounts you can use, how tax works on investing for your kids. And as I said, I'm happy to get a bit off track with some questions as we go through as well. Now, firstly, I just wanted to say a big shout out to our event partner for this event, Perla. If you're not already familiar with Perla, then you definitely should be because these guys are up to some awesome stuff. We collab on a bunch of events and we've just released a few events over the coming couple of months and into the new year now. We collab because we've got a strong alignment on those guys are big on they say boring investing for the long term, which I am huge on. There's no kickbacks or anything like that. We just know that these guys do great work. So pumped to be collaborating with those guys again. Also, just before I get into the content, once again, I was never here. This never happened. Guys, please don't rush out and make any life-changing decisions off the back of what we cover today. We strongly encourage you to seek out personalized advice from someone with a magnificent beard before taking any important action. Also, we will share a recording of the session afterwards as well. So that is there. We're recording as well. All righty. Oh, and yeah, look, subtle, not subtle plug. If you're not familiar with our content, actually, if there's any people that are on one of our webinars for the first time today, would absolutely love it if you say g'day in the chat. That would be awesome. I know that there's a lot of familiar faces I can see on the thing. G'day, Michael. Yeah, great to have you here. A heap of new faces. So thank you guys. Great to have you here. People joining in from all over the country as well. So first time caller, long time listener. Nice one, Andrew. Yeah, Look, guys, if we do a bunch of content, and I just mentioned that we have released our events to come up over the into the new year now as well. And so, we do a heap of content on socials. We've got a podcast called the Mo Money Podcast, and yeah, if you want to level up your money game, feel free to get around that content as well. Also, I just released a new book. I'm pretty excited about that. It's called Virgin Millionaire. Basically, well, step-by-step guide to your first million and beyond. But I'm going to touch on a couple of the elements that I cover in the book today, and it sort of talks about how to get to a pretty serious level of wealth, not because you want money for money's sake, but simply because living well in Australia does not come cheap. And so often a lot of the people that we help with their money and a lot of the people we talk to, they're trying to reach a financial position that exceeds the position of other people in their family and other people around them. So it's sort of like you're trying to get to a strong position, but almost like figuring it out on your own. And so yeah, like that can work, but it just obviously takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So this book is talking about how to like codify the different stages that people go through and how you can basically make progress faster. For anyone that's interested, we just released the audiobook for that as well. First time doing an audiobook. So if you're liking my sultry tones today and you want about 7 hours more of that in your ear holes, you can check that out. I just popped a link into the chat box there as well. Jason said he just finished the book this morning. Well done, Jason. That's a huge effort from knocking it out so quickly. Great framework and advice. Love it. That's great to hear. Thank you. So look, yeah, I'm going to touch on a couple of the elements though as we go through today. But if you want more, that's the way you can get it. Now, I thought I'd start by sharing a bit of an example talking about investing for your kids and how much of a difference it can actually make. So what I've got here, I've got this scenario starting with $0 today. That's the first important thing. So not needing a lot of money to get started, which you definitely do not need to invest for your kids. I've based this scenario on the long-term share market return in Australia, which the 30-year return on the Australian share market is 9.8%. Using the power of compounding, just investing into the share market average. I'm going to talk a little bit about the exact investments that you can use in order to get this sort of return, but know that it's just like a basic old index fund essentially. And then I've looked at if you save and invest different amounts of money, how that money would grow. So basically, if you save and invest $5 a day, by the time your kid reaches age 21, they're going to have about $125,000. At $10 a day, you're getting double that, $250,000. $20 a day, that's $500,000. And $40 a day is $1,080,000. And this is the power of compounding. Einstein called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, and in my experience, he's probably understating it. Now, keep in mind that in 20 years' time or 21 years' time, a latte at your favorite cafe is probably going to set you back like $20 with inflation. And this is a comment that I see a little bit from people when we start talking about this stuff, and particularly around investing for your kids. But here's the thing, guys. At the end of the day, having $125,000, $251,000, $503,000, or $1,080,000 is always going to be a hell of a lot better than having $0. I can tell you that for absolute certain. So this is the power of investing. And as I said with this example, this is starting with $0 today. So you don't need a lot of money to get started. Got a question here from RR. About tax efficiencies. This is quite a detailed question. So got some twins. It's going to be 15. What's the most tax effective way other than a trust to pool the income so they can combine their income? Look, I might come back to that when I answer the tax, when I get into the tax section, because there's a fair bit There's a fair bit to get into, and I am going to talk about different entities and using trusts as well. That's a really common question that we get when it comes to kids investing as well. So I might just park that one and circle back. But guys, please keep those questions coming. Now, look, I've just showed the power of money over time, compounding, how it can actually work. But you have to get started, and it's really easy, particularly when it comes to kids investing. It's a really nice thing to do, but it's also things where we've got a lot of stuff competing for our attention. Everyone's busy, and it's easy for life to get in the way. This will not happen on its own. You've got to do something. You don't need to do a lot, but you do need to do something. And particularly when it comes to kids investing, I'm a big advocate for automating that as much as you possibly can, because I reckon that the more you have to do, the more you can run out of time to do, forget, get wrong. So you want to systemize that as much as possible. The other thing, and something that I'm hoping that I can help you guys overcome today, is around the fear of making a mistake, which is something I see quite a lot. And common situation, people start squirreling away a bit of money for their kids, put it into a kid's like a savings account. And they might see a talk like this or see a bit of content and think, I should be investing the money. But then because it's money that's there for your kids, you don't want to stuff it up, basically. You don't want to do the wrong thing and end up blowing up the cash, and then they have less. And that fear can be paralyzing, leads to inaction and missed opportunity. So as we go through today, I want to help you overcome that and understand what's possible and what you can do to get on the front foot with this stuff. I also want to call out the fact that there are different stages that people go through with their money. And this is basically the core premise of the Virgin Millionaire, where I unpack these different stages. But this is something that's really important for people to recognize, particularly when it comes to investing for your kids, that if you're trying to be successful with your money, ultimately what you're working towards is this position, what we call the impact stage, where you're essentially fully financially free. You've got enough money so that you can basically live your ideal lifestyle. You don't have to stress about money anymore. That's the ideal scenario for most people. Everyone's lifestyle is going to look a little different, but ultimately that's essentially what it is. But no one starts in that position. Everyone starts at the start, starts by putting the building blocks in place, what we call the foundation stage, where you're setting things up to lay the platform for your future success. And then you go through these different stages: focus, optimize, accelerate. And the things that make sense, the things that are good ideas or good decisions at those different stages, really depend on which stage you're actually in. And so when it comes to investing for your kids, I see a lot of people like, it's a great idea, but if you're doing it at the wrong time, it's probably not going to be a good idea for you. So look, an example of this is like bonds are a great way to save tax, but if you use investment investment bonds is in the tax saving bonds. If you use that too early, it's going to be a mistake. Similarly, buying a property is good, but too early will destroy your surplus. Particularly for kids, investing for your kids is great, but if you're doing that when you don't have some of your own building blocks in place, it can be super stressful and mean that you're delaying things that are really important and potentially more beneficial for your family unit. Sometimes when it comes to money, you've got to put your own oxygen mask on first, because setting up your own finances so that it's working at least well enough for you to then concentrate on the next thing will actually allow you to do more for your kids in the future. So, if you see, and I hope you get some great ideas out of today, but it may be that you get to the end and go, well, actually, maybe I've got a couple of things that I need to be doing for me first before you crack into this with a full head of steam, essentially. And so the right move at the wrong time is the wrong move when it comes to your money. I think it's extra confusing because when it comes to money, everyone's got opinions and ideas on what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what makes a good idea, what makes a bad idea. A lot of times that something can be good for you and not good for someone else because of the stage that they're at, because of the other things that they've got going on with their money. Having an awareness of that, the fact that that is a thing that impacts the decisions that you should be making and what makes sense, is an important first step here. And I wanted to talk about this quote because today I'm going to talk about how you can systemize your own investing and investing for your kids. This quote from James Clear that says, "You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." I've already talked about the fact that I think it's important when you're investing that you're trying to automate things as much as you possibly can, your systems are really crucial. So I'm going to talk about the system that I use, the one we use with our clients, and how you can use that for yourself. But before we get into that, though, I just wanted to start with investing basics. And I'm going to start from the really start here when it comes to this stuff. So no doubt there's going to be a bunch of this that you already know. But bear with me. I do have a point. I'm going to sort of start from the super simple stuff and build on that to get into what investments should you be thinking about, what investments make sense, what accounts can you use, what investments options should you be looking at in those accounts as well. Before I get into that, though, I just got a couple of questions here. Question on the starting point for that example about how the money will grow 125,000, 50,000, etc. That's from birth, basically from birth to age 21. So it's a 21-year time frame. Veronica asks, does it work for grandkids? Yes, it absolutely does. It's exactly the same. And if you know that your kids are planning to have kids, like i.e. grandkids, you could start investing now for them as well. And then you get even more compounding working for you as well. Jackson says, if investing in, instead of investing $5 or $10 a day, would it be a good idea to stick in $5,000 straight away and then just forget about it and let it compound? What would the numbers be at 21 if that was the case? Is that a silly idea? No, it's not a silly idea at all, Jackson. If you've got the funds there to kickstart it, it will make a much bigger difference over time. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head because I don't have a calculator in here, but I would encourage you to jump over to the Money Smart website. They have a Money Smart compound interest calculator. It's one of the most powerful money tools that you can use, and it's completely free. You can get into the Money Smart calculator and say, I want to invest for 21 years, use the long-term return on the share market of 9.8%, and you can put in $5,000 as a starting point and see how that would grow, even with no extra contributions or with a little bit, how that would build as well. So I hope that helps, Jackson. Really powerful. We've put some content out about how to use compound interest calculators as well. So feel free to have a little bit of stock online to do that. Mrs. Max says, keen to invest for kids 11 and 9, have the ability to, but also want to educate kids in the process as one is already showing interest in money, finance, investing. That is awesome. And look, it's something that I do with my kids. I've got a 5 and a 3-year-old, so they're very young. But like the light bulbs are starting to come on with the 5-year-old, and I always try to find every opportunity I can to talk about investing, how you can grow money by being smart with investing. I show her my investing app and show her about, the markets and compounding, and we watch the line go up together and make that a bit of a thing. I don't know that the best way to do that. I think, the approach that I'm taking is just to provide some exposure to that and talk about it. To bring that into the family sort of conversation. But yeah, I am actually thinking about doing my next book as a kid's book. And for that, I'm going to pull in a bunch of research and really dive deep on how to frame that up. So watch this space, Mrs. Mac. All right, guys. So I'm going to jump into investing basics. And as I said, I'm starting from the building blocks here. The first thing that I want you to know is that your cash is going backwards after inflation. Any cash that you've got sitting in a savings account, if you're saving for your kids, that money is going backwards in real terms. The reason that it is going backwards is because any interest income that you get on a bank account is taxable at your marginal tax rate. If you earn, I've got the tax rates and we'll talk a bit more about tax, but if you earn above 45,000, your tax rate plus Medicare levy, 32%. So you're losing at least a third in tax, maybe as much as a half, depending on what your income is. Then when you get your headline return, pay a bit of tax to get your after-tax return, you then have to factor in inflation. And inflation is currently running at 3.8% or something. Even when inflation is lower, generally interest rates are lower, but cash is still going backwards. If it's not going backwards, you're getting a minuscule positive amount. And so that means that the money, while it might be increasing in absolute terms in your account, the buying power is actually shrinking, and it means it's going backwards. So I've got an example here talking about saving versus investing and how the money actually grows. And look, this isn't a specific kids saving example. It just says if you're saving and investing, I've used a number of $200 a week. If you do $100 a week, it's going to be half this. If you do $400 a week, it's going to be double this. So it's all linear in nature. If you were to save that money, After 5 years, you would have saved a total of about $50,000. Plus, you've got a little bit of interest income or a little bit of growth on that, depending on whether you're saving or investing. So, at $200 a week, after 5 years, you'd have about $52,299. If you'd invested the money instead, though, you'd have about $66,000. Keep that going, and you see that we start to diverge in terms of the returns. Like, it's pretty close at this level with 14 grand difference. 14 grand is a decent chunk of change, but still pretty close. After 10 years, though, saving is $109,000 and investing is $175,000. So you're basically more than 65,000 better off by investing compared to saving. After 20 years, though, the difference is even bigger. 230 grand saving, $641,000 investing. We're talking about $400,000 difference in a 20-year period. 30 years, even bigger, $363,000 saving, $1.87 million investing. And 40 years, just to hammer it home, $511,000 saving, $5.1 million, so 10x the amount of money by investing. Once again, this is simply investing into a fund that's tracking the share market, something like a boring old index fund. So something that's really easy for pretty much anyone to access. And so, I see a lot of people that they're saving money in a savings account. They don't want to stuff it up, and so they just keep saving, but there's an opportunity cost that's being created anytime you're not investing money, particularly money that's going to be there for the long term. So to get into the investment basics, the first thing that I want you guys to be across is the difference between defensive investments and growth investments. Defensive investments are things like cash or what we call fixed interest investments. That's like term deposits or bonds. These are generally quite stable income producing investments that are not designed to grow. They're designed to generate you an income. You put savings into a bank account, generates a bit of an interest income. The savings, the balance, the money that you put in, though, never actually grows. You just generate interest income. So your balance grows with the interest income that you generate. When you go over into the growth side, you've got property, residential, commercial, property funds, etc. Then you've got Australian shares and international shares. Now, these are investments that are designed to grow. So long as you choose good ones, over the long term, the money is going to grow. You buy a property for a value today. If it's a good one, in 10 years' time, it's going to be worth more. Same with shares, Australian shares and international shares. What we've got here, though, is the return on one spectrum, and then we've got the risk. The risk is measured in volatility or the ups and downs. And so defensive investments, particularly cash in Australia, cash is government guaranteed. You know it's not going to go backwards. Whereas when you move more into the property, Australian shares, international shares, well, as we've seen over the last couple of years, that the values do have periods where they go down. And so you need to be aware that if you're investing into growth investments, that there will be periods where your money goes down in value. Now, what you need to do when you're investing money is decide how much you want to have in growth investments like shares and property, and how much you want to have in defensive investments like cash and bonds. Now, this is partly how you feel about this, how you feel about risk. But my opinion is that when you're investing with a long time frame, and time frame is really important here, that you should be more focused on growth investments and less on defensive investments, because defensive investments give you two benefits, which is stability and income. And if you're investing for the long term, both of those matter a lot less. That being said, when you're investing in your personal name, having defensive investments, having cash in an emergency fund to fall back on is going to be really important to make sure that you're never forced to sell your investments at the wrong time. You generally don't want to be investing money that you need for the kids' school fees in 6 months' time, because if there's a share market correction in 6 months' time, you can end up being behind. Investment timeline is the other thing that, share market goes up and share market goes down over time. But it is possible that the share market, in the event of a serious market correction, that the share market goes down and stays down for a period of 7 to 10 years. They normally say that if you're investing money into shares, you should be prepared to leave the money there for 7 to 10 years or more, just in case the market conditions suggest that you should do that. Now, that's not to say that if you invest, you need to leave it there for 7 to 10 years or more. People get a little bit confused by this. For example, if you'd invested in the start of this year, well, the share market's up 15 or 20%. If you cashed out today, Happy days, no problem. And anytime you buy, you can still sell. So if you buy shares today, whether the share market goes up or down tomorrow, you can sell the shares. It's just that if there's a correction, it may not be a good idea to sell your shares. So timeline is really important. And this is why there's generally two categories that people invest in for kids. Sometimes it's like they have a pool of money that's allocated for the kids that they intend to spend from. If the kids have, a big school thing that they want to do, or maybe that's a bad example. If they want to do a course, or they got some medical stuff going on, or whatever, that you can just draw on the funds to spend it. That's more of a short-term savings account. But then you've got money that you intend to leave there for 10 years, 20 years, or longer. That's your long-term savings account. And knowing the difference ties in with what's the timeline that money should sit there for. And that's going to help you decide how much you should be investing. My take is that when it comes to those long-term investments, that you generally want it pretty much all of it in share type investments, shares and growth investments, and then you have cash available for your short-term and emergencies. It's also worth having a think about, Australia is a small part of the global investment markets. And so having some Australian shares and some international shares, and particularly having some exposure to US shares, is important because we are such a small part of the big pond. Another thing that you should really know when it comes to shares and share type investments is that all risk is not made the same. And so in this example here, I've got company one and company two. Now you can think of company one like CBA, for example, one of the biggest companies in the country, really stable, been around for 100 plus years, got diversified income streams, a lot of assets behind it. It's really big. It's got a lot of experience with management and doing all of the things that it does. And then company two, you can think of that like a tech startup company. With a tech startup company, it's going to have less assets behind it, and you're going to see more volatility in the share price, more ups and downs in the share price. That happens because, they're hoping that business goes really well, and maybe it does for a period of time, but then things can change quite quickly and then it starts performing poorly. And so you get much more of these swings and roundabouts. Now, often people start thinking when they move from being a balanced investor to like a growth or a high growth investor, or start putting it all into shares, they start thinking that they have to put more of the company two type startup speculative risk into their investments. You absolutely do not, particularly if you're following something like an index fund approach to investing, that an index fund is heavily tilted to the biggest blue chip premium. Blue chip just means premium, big, stable companies, the big companies, and you're getting a very tiny exposure, if any, to the really small companies, particularly in Australia where our share market's so concentrated. So be aware, and this is a big driver of fear for some people. They think that investing is gambling or it's speculating. It is absolutely not when you do it right. It is if you want it to be. If you want to speculate, if you want to throw all of your money into the latest crypto, I probably wouldn't suggest doing that at all, or specifically for kids. But that is a different that is speculating as opposed to investing. And that is something that's optional and not recommended, not recommended, at least not by me. I get that a lot of people, though, are interested in this. It's often not something that people think about so much for kids investing, which is probably a good thing. But people, particularly if they build a bit of experience with investing, they start thinking, I want a bit more. I want the ability to have an investment that shoots the lights out. You don't need that level of risk. You guys have already seen a couple of examples that I've shared with you where, you're investing $5 a day, $10 a day, $20 a day. And it builds in hundreds of thousands of dollars by just using the like a long-term index tracker share market type fund. You don't need the extra risk. Like if you speculate, you may get a slightly higher return, but you also don't need the extra risk that comes with that. So the point that I've got here is that once you build a foundation with your money, and this is why these stages of money are so important, that if you are interested in this, that you can do it in a way that doesn't jeopardize your progress, but you do it after you've built your foundations. Another important thing to be aware of is diversification. And for diversification, it just means spreading out your risk. And so in this example, I've again got company one and company two, but in this example, company one and company two are both blue chip premium companies. They are both having ups and downs, but they're broadly, sort of headed around the same direction. You could think of these, just for the purposes of the example, Commonwealth Bank and Woolworths. These are both very premium, very blue chip type companies. But they are in different sectors, they're different markets, so the share performance would be different. Now, when you get $10,000 and say you invest half into CBA and half into Woolworths, immediately your return on your $10,000, when one's doing well, it's going to be balanced by one that's doing less well. There's always going to be one that's doing more or less well. And what happens is that over time, the highs of one are balanced by the lows of the other, and the return ends up being smoother because you've got the average return. Now, that's with two investments. If you put 20, 200, 2,000, which is what you typically get with an index fund or an ETF or even any really big managed fund type investment, you're said to be, to use a bit of jargon, you're highly diversified with your investing, and that spreads your risk out quite a long way. It also means the more diversified you are, the only way your investments can go to zero is if every single investment goes bust at the same time, and the chances of that happening become less and less likely the more you have in your portfolio. Now, I want to talk about index funds versus non-index funds for a second. Keep in mind, as I talk through this, I am a little bit biased because I follow an index fund investing approach. I advocate that with our clients. I'm going to tell you why in a second as well. But firstly, I'll just explain what these are for anyone that's not too familiar with that term, and then I can see a bunch of questions. Keep those questions coming, guys. I'll crack into a few questions shortly. Now, the ASX 200, that's the ASX is the Australian Stock Exchange, and 200 means the 200 largest companies in Australia. Now, this data is a little bit old now, but what we've got here is essentially the top 10 companies in the country. Commonwealth Bank, we know what it's worth. We know what all of these companies are worth. And so we know that the combined value of the 200 largest companies in Australia is about $1.6 trillion, or at least it was when I put together this slide. Now, CBA at this time is worth about 200 billion, which accounts for 9% of the $1.6 trillion number. We know what all of these percentages are because it's all publicly available information. Now, all an index fund does is it just replicates those exact same percentages, but on a smaller scale, so that the return on an index fund is pretty much identical to the return on the share market. So if you see the news at night or Yahoo Finance or whatever, where they say the share market's up by 1% or down by 1%, what they mean is that the combined value of all of those companies is increased or decreased by 1%. What an index fund does is it does exactly the same thing. So that's called an index fund or a passive fund. They're called passive because they passively follow the market. The alternative is what we call an active fund. And for an active fund, that's where they're going to invest slightly differently to what the market is actually doing. They're going to try and find out which investments they think are going to perform best, put more of them into the investment portfolio, and then they'll put fewer of the ones that they don't think will do as well, which sounds great in theory. The challenge, though, of this is that the benefits or the sales pitch for active funds is that they have the potential for outperformance, that you can do better. But the downside is that no one's got a crystal ball, and so we don't know what investments will perform best. And the statistics show us that index funds perform better more than 80% of the time. In fact, in some categories, it's above 90% of the time. If you look specifically at like large company funds, for example, an index fund will do better more than 90% of the time. That means that with an index fund, and particularly for someone that doesn't have a lot of experience investing, and I suppose even if you do, but you more than 8 out of 10 times, you're going to be better off by investing with an index fund compared to a non-index fund. The other really great thing about index funds is that because you've got a little bit of every single company in your investments, the only way that it can go to zero is if every single company in the country goes bust at the same time, which, think about it in the Australian context, all of the banks go bust, Woolworths, Telstra, Wesfarmers, BHP, the mining companies. Like, if that happens, we've all got a lot bigger problems than our investment portfolio. We're talking about zombie apocalypse or nuclear winter type situations. So, keep in mind that if the world's best investors, because the actively managed funds are run by research houses, professional investors, people with decades and decades of experience with almost unlimited resources that they can use to analyze the market and figure out which investments are going to perform best, then what hope do I or you have about choosing the best investments over time? Like, you're probably not going to get it right. Plus, it's a lot more stressful. And when you're invested in an index fund and the market goes down, your investment will go down. You know that your investment's gone down because the market goes down. When you're invested in an active fund and your investment goes down, it could be because of the market, it could be because of the fund manager, it could be because of the investment selection. And so it's a lot more stressful. And I see a lot more people that bail out of investments when that happens. And selling when markets are down is obviously the worst time to sell your investments. I'll come into the types of investments. So I can see a bunch of questions coming through. So I might just have a quick look and see what's in here. Thanks for the questions, guys, as well. Have a Vanguard Kids account, and I'm hoping to confirm, understand if this is a good idea or what do we have better, smarter options. Ray, you're going to love the next section. I'm going to get right into that, so I might just hold fire. If I don't cover it, hit me up. Hit me up if you've got any clarifying questions. Another one from Sasha. Bought my kids BHP and ANZ shares about 15 years ago, and they're the same price today. Why haven't the shares grown? I think that probably partly depends on your timing. Although, if we think about 15 years ago, that was just maybe in the lead up or just post the global financial crisis as well. And so if you bought out at a high point in markets there, then that could be the result of that. But also, it's probably why, like, that highlights a part of the reason why I'm not a huge fan of doing individual share type investments, where instead you get a fund and then you're benefiting from every company. And that means that you're always going to benefit from the best companies. As well. So that's worth thinking about as well. But I see that a little bit with shares and with property as well, that people sometimes, if you get it, you might buy a really great investment, but with the timing, it might look like it's not growing that much. So long as it's good, though, you've just got to hold the course. How about putting money into parent super and giving to the kids at the appropriate time? That's absolutely a reasonable idea. I do actually have that coming up as well, so I might get into that a bit more there. LS says, index fund subject to tax and those returns in the returns that you shared. So investment income, I'm going to come into tax in a second, but the income that you get from your shares, depending on how it's structured from a tax perspective, they are subject to tax. The return figures that I mentioned are after fees inside the fund, but they're before tax. Hope that helps, LS. M says, do you prefer investing in a property or shares for your kids? Which growth is the highest with the properties? There's a power of leverage. Yeah, look, you've hit the nail on the head there, M. A property is generally going to outperform a share portfolio because you're going to use borrowing to do that. And so if you can afford to buy a property for your kids, happy days. And I'm sure they'd be appreciative. It is important to choose a good one. But yeah, that's generally going to be a winning strategy. You just want to be careful, obviously, risk management and cash flow and all those sorts of things. RR has got a really good question here about where is a good place to put one's emergency fund around $30,000 since cash is not great inflation-wise. Are bonds a good place like Vanguard, bond index, blah, blah. As much as it's painful to leave your emergency fund sitting in a cash account, this is not advice, so please seek that out. But in my opinion, my personal opinion, cash is probably where it's at. If you've got an offset account, then that's going to be slightly better than a cash account, particularly if the offset account is attached to your home mortgage. But even if it's attached to an investment property, that's generally going to get you more of a return than sitting in a high interest savings account. If you do anything other than put the money into cash, even something like investing into a bond fund, it is still subject to market movements. And we saw a lot of people go wrong with this over the last little while, where bond interest rates were really low, and then the interest rates started creeping up, which sort of sounds like a good thing. But if you had a bond and it was paying 2%, and then new bonds start paying more than 2%, immediately your bond is worth less. And so we saw a lot of people that got pumped with the value of their money. It comes with quite a lot of risk investing in bonds, particularly around interest rates that people aren't aware of. And so if you've got your emergency fund and then it goes down in value and then you need to cash it out, that can be a big, big problem. And for that reason, it's generally when you need money accessible, you sort of do need it accessible. That's the price of having peace of mind. Yeah. And it's not a huge price at the end of the day. 30 grand, the share market return, like it's not nothing, but it's also, in my opinion, having that peace of mind is definitely worth it. Uh, I'm not sure whether I should invest the extra money or make extra mortgage payments. This will cut down on the length of the loan and will save on paying interest. Great question as well. Look, it is, when you look at the pure maths of it, because the long-term return on the share market is 9.8% and your mortgage interest rate is like 6%, then shares is going to be a little bit better. But if this is what I mean about the stages when it comes to your money, that when if you've just bought your first property and there's a bit of risk, a bit of pressure from a cash flow perspective, sometimes smashing that mortgage down a bit will give you a bit of breathing room that makes everything that comes next easier. And so in that case, I think it's completely fine to focus on mortgage. But on the flip side, if your mortgage is low relative to your property value and your cash flow is good, then investing money is generally going to give you more of a return and more of compounding as well. So it depends on you, but I hope that helps at least think about the decisions. I might just take one more question and then move on. I can see that there's a heap, and keep these coming through, guys. Would it be better to hold shares in your name? I'm going to come back to that one because I've got tax stuff coming up in a sec. Alrighty, so I'm going to talk about types of investments, then I'm going to talk about tax, and I can see a few questions on that. So basically, there's 5 different sort of broad categories of investments here. Ultimately, shares is when you buy a share in Commonwealth Bank. You own a tiny little slice of Commonwealth Bank. You're then entitled to a tiny little slice of their very large profit. And when the value of the company grows over time, the value of your tiny little slice will increase in value as well. Now, the other 4 options on this list, managed funds, ETFs, investing apps, and child-specific accounts, are generally all investments that give you access to a pool of shares. They're just slightly different tax wrappers, slightly different structuring to this, but managed funds, ETFs, micro-investing, and kid-specific accounts generally are giving you access to shares. So know that they're all different types of the same thing. Now, personally, I don't invest too much into direct companies because of the lack of diversification that comes with it. And it also takes a lot more time to manage them. And so generally, and this is an approach that we advocate with our clients as well, that generally we're talking about using managed funds or ETFs or an investing app or a kid-specific account. Then you've got one account. You can generally choose just one option. You can also automate your transfers in and automate your investing and systemize your success in this area as much as possible. Now, as I said, share investing is buying this little slice of one company. Managed funds is just a pool of shares. There's a slight different tax structure between managed funds, ETFs, and micro investing. But with both the with ETFs in particular, it's worth noting that there is a brokerage cost that comes when you're buying ETFs that you do have to pay. Can be quite low, particularly with some of the investment apps. Perla is a reasonable one to look at, seeing as they're our partner for this event. Can be quite low, but it is still a thing, and that can have a bit of an impact on how much money you're investing. Whereas these micro investing apps and kids investing apps in particular allow you to get started with pretty much any amount of money. There's some that allow you to start with as low as 1 cent. Most of them, it's like $5 at least. The fees are a lot lower. There's generally no fixed fee or brokerage costs like that you have to pay when you buy a share or an ETF, meaning that you can invest smaller amounts without having big fixed fees eating into your costs. The other thing that I love about micro investing apps and kid-specific accounts is that they're really easy to set up. They've got good user experience, not like a lot of the finance companies where it's like paperwork and difficult, hard work and time consuming. So that can be a huge help. I've put on there a few kids investing accounts for you to take a look at as a starting point. Again, this is not financial advice. Perla, they've got a Head Start app, which is separate to their Perla app, which is specific for kids investing. Braze have a kids option. Spriggy has one as well. And then you can use those accounts as an education tool. You can also use any of the other accounts though. A general investing app is fine. A managed fund account is fine. An ETF account is fine, depending on what it is that you're going to do. Below $200,000, which is obviously where pretty much everyone's going to start most of the time, you're hardly going to notice the difference in the overall return, particularly if you're like I looked at it for index fund ETF versus managed fund the other day. And over a 10-year period, the difference if you had $100,000 invested between investing in a managed fund versus an ETF was like $60. And so I see a lot of people that they get so caught up, and I can see that there's a few questions on around this point in the comments. People get so hung up trying to choose the perfect investment, and they spend all this time and delay taking action to actually find the perfect investment account. But they're all very similar in terms of the outcomes. And so then instead of, if they're all similar, then that says, well, how do you pick? I would pick the one that's easy, the one that's easy for you to set up, the one that's easy for you to automate. And that's why the investing apps and the kids investing apps and regular investing apps, I think, are winners, in a lot of cases, because they're so easy to automate and you can invest any amount on any sort of frequency that you want. It gets super simple to get started. And when you build up your money, as I said, it's only really when you start getting well into the six-figure territory that you need to actually even think about changing. Not to say that you need to actually change, but then you can look at what your options are, but at least you've built all of that momentum. And realistically, it's probably going to take you quite a while to get to that point. So stick to what's simple for you, what you can systemize, and that goes a long, long way. Getting started, you don't have to get it perfect. No one knows what perfect is until after the fact. Tax planning is an important part of this, though, and because tax can have an impact particularly if you're trying to build up a decent chunk of change for your kids or for future generations. The tax rates are different for different entities. And what I mean by entity, basically a tax entity is anything with a tax file number. So every person is a tax entity because they've all got our own tax file number. Each of our super funds are a tax entity. It's got its own tax file number. We've also got trusts, investment bonds, companies. Each of these different structures is what's called a tax entity because it's got its own tax rules and its own tax rates in a lot of cases. And so in your personal name, if you're investing in your personal name, any investment income or dividends and capital gains is going to have tax payable at marginal tax rates. If you're earning above $45,000 a year, like it all adds on top of your salaried income. And so that's how the marginal tax rate system effectively works. It all adds on top. And so particularly if you're trying to build up a good chunk of change from investing, your own investing and investing for your kids, it's going to push you right up into the 30+% tax brackets, maybe 47%. Whereas the entity tax for different entities, it's different. And so kids have their own tax rates for minors because the ATO have created this carve out basically to stop rich people from putting all these assets in their kids' names and saving a whole bunch of tax as a result. But the tax rates for kids are punitive, meaning that they're higher. In fact, that they're basically the top marginal tax bracket kicks in at $1,300 a year. And there is a small bracket before that where it's actually taxed at 66%, which is pretty outrageous. But it is obviously only on a small amount of money as well. And so, that's worth being aware of, which a lot of people aren't. Then you've got investment bonds. So investment bonds are taxed on income that's generated, so dividend income at a flat rate of 30%. which is a lot lower than most people's marginal tax rates. But the beauty with investment bonds is that if you've held investments for 10 years or more, you don't pay any capital gains tax. So they have this carve out. An investment bond, sometimes people get confused with bonds thinking that it's like a corporate bond, or that we had that question before on bonds. But an investment bond is an investment account, sort of like a super fund, where you can choose different investment options and it's subject to different tax rules. And when you follow, though, when you keep the money invested, basically you don't pay any capital gains tax, which can be a big help. Super also has a lower tax rate, lower again, maximum rate of 15%. And if you use a trust and or company, you can cap your tax rate at 30% as well, which once again, that's a lot lower than most people's personal marginal tax rates. Now, in this example, I've got how much tax across a family unit the different members would pay based on earning 10 grand a year of investment income. So if we've got mum earning $145,000, her tax rate is going to be 39%. She's going to pay $3,900 in tax. Dad's earning $35,000. He's going to pay 18% tax. The 15-year-old daughter earning $2,000 a year, she's going to be paying the higher minor tax rates, 47%, $40,700 on the 10 grand in income. 18-year-old daughter's not going to pay any tax, and super fund pays $1,500, company pays $3,000. Now you see that the difference between the highest and lowest tax rates here is the difference between paying zero tax and paying $4,700 in tax. That's on 10 grand of income. So you're potentially saving half of the money that could then be reinvested to grow faster. And this is why tax planning across family units is so important when it comes to long-term investing. Now, when you're investing for your kids, you have basically there's three main choices in terms of how you can do it. You can invest in your name. So you can open up an investing account in your own name, and then basically all of the investment income and gains will be added to your personal marginal tax rate, personal assessable income and tax at your marginal tax rate. That means that you carry the tax burden while the money is growing. And when you sell, because you want to give the money to the kids in the future, that there's potentially going to be some capital gains that you have to pay. Now, you can just take that tax money out of the money that's being invested, and that's fine. Like, I'm sure your kids aren't going to complain at the other side, but being aware that there is a bit of tax there is important. You can also invest in your kid's name. But if you do that, they're going to pay tax at the top marginal tax rate, almost from $1, essentially, like effectively. And so that means that you're giving up 50% of your investment returns. You can also use an informal trust structure where it's basically you're investing sort of in your name, but with your kids as beneficiaries of the money. What happens in that case is that you pay the tax on the income until you transfer it to your kids. But when you transfer it to your kids, there's no CGT on transfer because it's held in their name beneficially. Now, this gets quite complicated and quite deep. There is a blog that we put up on the Pivot Wealth blog website. So you can check that out if you want to drive right into the technicalities, because it is worth thinking about. I would say to you, though, that if you're trying to figure this out to get started, just get started and figure it out later. Don't stress too much unless you're going to invest $100,000 at the start, then, take the time, maybe pay for some good advice and get that right. But otherwise, just get started and you can figure out the rest later. Don't get stuck in the inaction trap waiting for that to happen. Also, Pearl have some information on their website about that. So you can definitely check that out as well to get on the front foot with your tax stuff. Now, my take is that when it comes to investing, the key options, if you're investing your kid in your name, it's simple and it's easy. In your kid's name, particularly like straight with them, the tax rates are high and it's punitive. If you're investing a lot of money, if you're investing a lot of money for yourself and or your kids, then you can look at bonds or trusts, which generally have more tax savings attached to them. And if you're close to retirement, older, or you've got a lot of money, looking at superannuation, because that can be a serious tax saving because the super tax rates are so low. Now, I might actually just skip over this section because I'm just a little bit mindful of time and I can see that there's so many questions. here as well. I do want to talk about planning though quickly, and so how you can actually plan around your kids investing and your own money. Now, this is a process that we follow when we help people set up a plan at Pivot Wealth, but it's the same process that anyone really needs to follow. If you're trying to do something simple around just investing for your kids, maybe that's less necessary in the short term. But if you're thinking broadly about your money and where this fits, and you're wanting to make sure that you do everything right, this is the approach that you need to take. Firstly, focus in on what's actually important to you. Then understand what you've got to work with, what money's coming in, what money's going out, what's left over, and what can you do with it. There's a bunch of strategy options that you can take. Do you invest in shares? Do you buy property? Whatever. And then you decide on the one that gives you the right balance between the financial outcomes and the lifestyle outcomes that you've got. Put it together into an action plan where you know exactly what steps you need to take to turn your great ideas, your great strategy into great outcomes and more dollars in your bank account. And then try to automate as much as you possibly can. Automate your savings, automate your investing, automate your kids' investing, automate your debt reduction. And that sets the platform. From there, it's about ongoing execution and refinement to keep, optimizing and building your momentum. Now, it can be confusing, but you can see how kids investing fits with this. And you can also look quite closely at your kids investing and when it's going to mature, relation to their age can help you set some good goals around this stuff as well. When you're thinking about your own money, there's some key steps that I think that you should be looking at going through. The first thing that you want to do is sort out your own savings, then start investing. Start investing for you. Get your property on track and get into the property market. In my opinion, if you're not yet in the property market and you want to be, and you should want to be, you probably don't want to go ham investing for your kids at that point. You should be focused instead on investing for yourself and building your own property deposit to get things actually working for you. And then from there, you can crank your kids investing once you've got this really important thing, area of your money sorted out. So guys, I'm going to come into questions and keep those questions coming in. I'm going to talk about, before I do though, I just want to wrap up talking about your progression from where you are today to future state with your money. Now, a lot of people, when they think about getting from where they are to future state, they think about their progression like a straight line. But whether it's for you or for your family as a unit, in the future, you're going to be somewhere on the spectrum of some people are doing really well, some people doing not so well. But the progression is not a straight line because of the compounding impact of time and money. It's actually a curve. So if you're not 100% on track to end up exactly where you want to be today, you need to do some stuff and do what we call jump the line. Once you jump the line, sort out your savings, start investing, be smarter with your tax or whatever, then you just need to take the next step and the next step and the next step. And that's easier because you're already on the path. But the sooner that you leave it, the more time goes on that jumping the line becomes more and more painful, and putting yourself in the best position can become impossible. As you saw with some of the examples that I've shared, that for investing for your kids, if you start young, you don't need to do a lot to create some pretty incredible results. But if you wait until they're 10, 15, like you're going to need to do a lot more to end up in the same position. So the sooner you start, the easier it would be. And I love this quote from Derek Sivers that says, if more information was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with perfect abs. It's great to get great ideas. And I hope you guys have got some great ideas today. But at the end of the day, you've got to take action because action is what delivers results. And so, look, guys, this is obviously, our bread and butter and what we help people with at Pivot Wealth. And so if you want a hand to take some action, I've just popped this link into the chat, goes into our calendar. We do these 10-minute investing focus chat sessions where we basically talk through the opportunities, give you an opportunity to do some no BS Q&A and understand what's possible, what your next steps are, and how you can get started. So if you're interested in that, we've got a few slots in the calendar over the next week. And into next week. So feel free to get around that. I just pop that link into the chat, or you can use the QR code that's on your screen there as well. And look, if you like this and got some value out of it, jump out of the feel free to check out our other content as well. So guys, I'm going to jump into the questions. I hope you found that helpful. I can see that there's a ton here, and I'm happy to run a little bit over as well, but I'm mindful that people have to jump off. So I'm going to crack in. Does that mean that having two ETFs is sufficient, i.e., one for Australia market, one for the global market? Yes, in my opinion, again, not advice, but even having one ETF, there are some ETFs that invest in both the Australian share market and the US share market and global share markets as well. So you can just have one. Absolutely. Could you talk about how to invest tax efficiently so the returns can be used for paying for education fees, private school fees, college fees? Look, Anusha, I'm not an expert when it comes to some of the different bond structures that you can use, but I think that the general investing bonds are worth seriously looking at if you want to drive some tax efficiencies. Pretty low cost to set up. Saving some serious tax there as well. Although I know that there's more sort of things coming to market, scholarship funds and those sorts of things. They can sometimes be a little bit expensive as well. So just keep an eye on the fees as well. Got a couple of questions, one from Mrs. Mack and one from Kerry talking about buying property and how do you structure it? Do you do it in their name or do you do it in your name? Yes, you can. You can do it in your name. You can do it in their name, or you can do it under a trust type setup as well. Same tax implications apply. Worth chatting to a good mortgage broker. If you're thinking about going down that path, we've got a great one at Pivot. So if you want some help with that, chat to us and we can sort of point you in the right direction there as well. But because you need to balance, like the banks want things structured in a certain way from a serviceability and a security perspective, depending on what the numbers are. And obviously, if you're looking at buying property for your kids, then, you're probably talking about some bigger numbers potentially. So yeah, I would say get some good advice in that case. Guys, I'm going to stick around for another couple of minutes because I can see that there's some questions coming in, but I am mindful that some people probably need to jump. So, great to have you. Look forward to seeing you next time. Next events are coming up. They're already on our Eventbrite page, so you can check that out as well for anyone that needs to jump off. How do you see REITs in the diversification strategy instead of invest how do you see REITs in the diversification strategy instead invest directly in properties? I'm not fully following that question, Rodrigo. I'm sorry. Maybe you could clarify. But REITs are diverse. So a REIT is a real estate investment trust. That's like a share where you're buying into different properties. It's typically commercial property, so it can be a little bit more diversified. So yeah, but you can buy one property, and I think if you buy a good one, a lack of diversification when it comes to property is less of an issue than it is when it comes to share type investments because shares are very market driven as well. So I personally see that as less of an issue. I hope that helps. But let me know if there was something further there, Rodrigo. Milton says, I keep my rainy day fund, cash fund sitting in my primary residence offset accounts. Look, I think that makes a lot of sense using an offset account, and particularly on your own residence where the interest income is not, the interest costs are not tax deductible, because on your home mortgage, the after-tax cost of your interest is like 6%. So it's actually, by putting money in an offset account, the return is going to be higher than having money sitting in a savings account, even if it's generating you 5%. Plus, it's not taxable. Because there's no interest income. It's like you're saving interest compared to you earn 5% and then you're paying that out in tax as well. How do you actually purchase a bond? Well, if you're looking at investment bonds, you need to find an investment bond provider, and then you just open an investment account like any other type of investment account. Some of them you need a financial advisor because they are a little bit complicated. And look, I think it's worth maybe at least you can have a chat to us or have a chat to someone if you're thinking about going down this path, because it is generally a longer term investment. You don't want to sort of muck it up at the start, but you can just set them up directly through investment bond providers. Evan says, does parent get tax offset if drawing down on mortgage for kids trust investment? I think it depends on exactly how that's structured. So drawing down on mortgage tax offset. I think you might be referring to a debt recycling strategy. Maybe clarify that one for me, Evan. If you borrow to invest for your kids, do you get some tax deductions? The short answer is yes. It just depends on the type of structure. Kerry says, "Do you mentioned investing in super for your kids? Is that putting extra money into your own super, or can you open a super account from a kid from a young age?" Yeah, you can do either or both. So you can invest in your own super, particularly if you're a bit older and you know that you will be able to access some money by the time you want to give money to your kids, or you can open an account for them. A lot of really rich people do this, that they open an account, crank it full of money, and then it just sits there bubbling away. Um, I'm just going to take one more question here, guys, and thank you so much. I can see that there's a ton of questions. If anyone didn't get their question answered and it's really burning, feel free to hit me up either on socials or through our website as well. If I buy an ETF under my name and now want to and later want to transfer to my adult child, how does the CGT work? Does the child need to pay the CGT based on their marginal tax rate? Well, if you own investments in your name and then fully in your name, and then you transfer them to your kid, that's like you selling them. So you pay the CGT, not them. If you sell the investments, put the money in a pile, you get a tax bill. Maybe you pay it from the money that's from the sale, and then you've got money left over that you could give them or transfer to them. But if you transfer the shares, it's like a sale in your name. If you do it in an informal trust, though, then generally the ATO's rules say that they don't pay capital gains tax on the transfer. So, guys, I hope that helps. Appreciate all the questions coming through, and yeah, guys, great to have you on. There's a ton there as well. So, guys, I hope you've enjoyed that. Feel free to hit me up online if you get stuck, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the next one. Appreciate all the comments, guys. Cheers. I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.